testament of power. The evening air over the estate carried a quiet stillness, broken only by the methodical sound of tools working against metal. Inside the dimly lit study, Arthur Matthews stood near the heavy mahogany desk, watching the craftsman complete his task with practiced precision. The man put down his equipment, stepped back, and wiped his hands on a cloth. He smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his trade exceptionally well. Arthur Matthews glanced at the cabinet and nodded softly. The work was precise, leaving no trace that anyone had ever tampered with the lock or the internal mechanism. Harry Layton looked up, adjusting his jacket. He remarked that it was always a good idea to hire someone with real experience rather than a younger person who might struggle with the simplest mechanical tasks. Porter, the quiet assistant standing near the entryway, stepped forward to escort the visitor out. Before leaving, Harry Layton reminded Arthur Matthews that if any future needs arose, he remained available for hire. Once the front door closed, Glendon Ryan entered the room with a look of visible agitation. He questioned the wisdom of employing a former convict for such a sensitive task, wondering aloud why a more traditional approach had not been taken. Arthur Matthews replied calmly that under short notice, securing top skill required flexibility rather than academic credentials. The two men immediately began searching through the extensive records stored in the metal cabinets. Glendon Ryan pulled folder after folder, examining land acquisitions, corporate tax returns, debt structures, and merger agreements. As the minutes ticked by, his frustration grew. He insisted that after 2 decades of service, he knew precisely where personal documents ought to be stored. Yet, the specific document they sought was nowhere to be found. Glendon Ryan paused, leaning against the desk. He expressed concern about what might happen if the original document surfaced, noting that he had already destroyed the copy sent over the previous afternoon. Arthur Matthews urged his colleague to maintain his composure, pointing out that panicking served no purpose. There was, after all, only one person who truly knew where the original text had been placed. That person was Margaret Jason. Across town, inside a brightly lit office suite, Margaret Jason adjusted her jacket as she walked into the meeting room. She was surprised to see Glendon Ryan waiting alongside Arthur Matthews. She greeted them politely, remembering their long-standing professional connection through the corporate office. She explained that she had received a message stating that Richard Corwin Bradley wished to see her urgently, and she asked where he was. Arthur Matthews motioned for her to sit down, explaining that there were important matters to clarify before any meeting could occur. Glendon Ryan brought up the topic of the late-stage personal arrangements and asked her what she knew about the latest document. Margaret looked at them with genuine confusion, stating that such private matters were between them and their client. She expressed concern for Richard Bradley, knowing he had been unwell in recent days. In the background, a small radio on a side table broadcast the evening news update. The announcer reported mild weather conditions for the region before transitioning to the lead story of the night. Richard Corwin Bradley, one of the nation's most prominent financial figures, had passed away at the age of 52 aboard his private aircraft while traveling to London for specialized medical care. With an estate estimated at $500 million and no immediate family members, speculation had already begun regarding the eventual distribution of his vast assets. Margaret sat in stunned silence, her voice barely a whisper as she expressed her sadness over the loss of a remarkably generous man. Glendon Ryan monitored her reaction closely. He cited security reports indicating that she had met with Richard Bradley frequently over the past few weeks. Margaret explained simply that he knew of his failing health and merely wished to converse with a trusted old friend. Glendon Ryan then questioned why Richard Bradley had spent 2 hours at her secretarial agency on Friday evening. Margaret maintained that he had stopped by briefly, but Glendon Ryan insisted the security logs showed a much longer duration, precisely enough time to draft and finalize a new legal document. Margaret reiterated that she possessed no knowledge of any such document and requested to leave. However, Arthur Matthews motioned to Porter, instructing that she be kept on the premises until the full truth was established. Outside the main residence, the quiet night was shattered by a sudden commotion. A short time later, Porter returned to the inner room, his face pale. He reported the tragic news that Margaret Jason was gone. Glendon Ryan reacted with alarm, demanding to know how such a disaster could occur. Porter explained that it had been a terrible accident resulting from a sudden, panicked attempt to leave. Arthur Matthews quickly instructed Porter to ensure that any investigation would show the event took place far away from the private estate grounds. The following morning, the sun shone brightly over the city as Barnaby Jones walked into his office, carrying a morning newspaper. His associate, Jedediah Romano Jones, whom everyone called JR, was reviewing notes at his desk alongside Betty Wilson. JR mentioned that the preliminary official reports classified Margaret Jason's fall from her office building as an intentional act, pure and simple. However, Betty explained that Margaret's daughter, Linda, was deeply distraught and refused to believe the official conclusion. Barnaby reflected on the situation, noting that Margaret Jason had often provided reliable temporary office assistance in past years whenever regular staff took time off. Although they were not close personal friends, her reputation for steady, sensible behavior was well known. JR wondered why they were devoting so much effort to an acquaintance, but Barnaby felt a duty to offer clarity to a grieving daughter. They drove over to the Jason residence, where Linda was sitting in the quiet garden behind the house. She greeted Barnaby with heartfelt gratitude, explaining that the local authorities seemed quick to close the file, treating her concerns as mere emotional distress. She described how, on Sunday evening, her mother had been resting comfortably at home in a casual robe while Linda went to study with a classmate. It made no sense for her mother to suddenly dress up, travel across town to her commercial office late at night, and end her life without cause. Linda revealed a crucial detail. Over the past 3 weeks, her mother had received several quiet phone calls from an unidentified man who refused to leave a name. Whenever these calls came, Margaret would leave immediately to meet him. Linda noted that her mother had never shown romantic interest in anyone since her father passed away around the same time Linda was born. Furthermore, on the preceding Friday, a large black limousine had pulled up to the house. The gentleman inside remained in the rear seat behind tinted glass, as though he wished to avoid being recognized. Barnaby listened attentively, offering gentle comfort while encouraging Linda to focus on positive activities to help process her grief. He noticed the garden beds nearby and suggested that tending to the flowering plants could offer therapeutic comfort. Linda agreed, promising to begin working on the garden beds her mother had loved so much. Meanwhile, at the public probate court, reporters gathered around Arthur Matthews and Glendon Ryan as they exited the building. Journalists pressed for exact figures regarding the Bradley estate, pointing out that the initial filing listed the total merely as exceeding $1 million, while popular estimates placed it closer to $500 million. Glendon Ryan politely explained that the law did not demand an exact immediate figure on day one. When reporters noted that the existing document on file dated back to 1958, Glendon Ryan maintained that Richard Bradley was fully confident his longtime representatives would carry out his charitable wishes, making any subsequent document unnecessary. Arthur Matthews added a few reassuring remarks, skillfully guiding the press away without revealing any substantive detail. As they stepped into their private vehicle, Glendon Ryan admitted he felt nervous about the persistent questions, especially regarding the destruction of the duplicate document. Arthur Matthews reminded him that as co-executors under the established filing, proper management would yield substantial administrative fees, provided no alternative instructions surfaced. Arthur Matthews expressed confidence that if any document existed from Friday night, it would soon be located and handled discreetly. Back at the laboratory, Barnaby examined several items recovered from Margaret Jason's belongings. He focused on a small trace of dried mud and a tiny plant fragment caught in the lower hem of her dress. Using a magnifying lens, Barnaby identified the rare botanical specimen as Stymophyllum affine, an exotic climbing vine originating from tropical South American regions and strictly restricted from general importation. Betty noted that it was impossible for Margaret to have picked up such a rare floral petal while walking down a standard city sidewalk in Beverly Hills. Barnaby agreed, forming the hypothesis that Margaret had been present at a specialized private conservatory or estate prior to the incident at her office. He asked Betty to visit the Public Records Office to gather all background historical data regarding Margaret Jason's early family life. Meanwhile, JR visited the Secretarial Agency office to review financial ledgers with the longtime office manager, Thelma Thompson. Thelma was initially hesitant to open the company books, but JR explained he was assisting Linda in organizing her mother's affairs. Upon reviewing the accounts spanning 5 years, JR discovered a recurring monthly payment of $3,000 originating from the Kenray Corporation, bearing the personal signature of Glendon Ryan. Thelma explained that Glendon Ryan had immense professional confidence in Margaret and frequently utilized their services for high-profile clients. However, JR noted that $3,000 a month was an unusually high and consistent sum for ordinary part-time typing. Thelma vigorously defended Margaret's character, rejecting any implication of impropriety and emphasizing that Margaret was a woman of impeccable integrity. Later that afternoon, Glendon Ryan met secretly with Harry Layton in an isolated room. Harry Layton demanded $10,000 in cash to maintain his silence regarding the late-night vault entry. Glendon Ryan handed over the envelope, warning that extortion was a dangerous path. Harry Layton accepted the funds with a grin, confident in his leverage. However, as Glendon Ryan departed, an associate sent by Arthur Matthews stepped out from the shadows, ensuring that the loose end represented by Harry Layton was permanently resolved, while also taking steps to eliminate Glendon Ryan to consolidate control. When news of the sudden double tragedy reached the authorities, Barnaby visited the scene to confer with local investigators. The initial impression suggested a sudden dispute between the two men, but Barnaby recognized that Harry Layton's past background involved nonviolent mechanical safe opening rather than spontaneous robbery. Barnaby reasoned that a deeper connection existed between the estate management and the individuals involved. Betty returned from her research at the Hall of Records with significant historical clarity. She discovered that Margaret Jason had been legally divorced from her former husband, Ted Jason, 2 full years before Linda was born. Further investigation with military acquaintance Cap Hutchins revealed that Ted Jason had served abroad and had never re-established contact with Margaret after their separation. Cap recalled that during that period 20 years ago, Margaret had worked as a private secretary for the prominent executive Richard Corwin Bradley. Putting the timeline together, Barnaby realized that Linda was in fact the biological daughter of Richard Bradley, explaining why regular financial support had been quietly provided through corporate channels for nearly 2 decades. Back at the Jason residence, JR helped Linda tend to the garden beds in the backyard, bringing a light-hearted warmth to the afternoon. Shortly after, Thelma Thompson arrived, expressing deep concern for Linda's well-being and offering to stay at the house to keep her company. While working among the dirt near the vintage glad plants, Linda's trowel struck a sealed, waterproof metal casing buried shallowly beneath the soil. Opening the container, Linda discovered a handwritten, fully executed document dated from the preceding Friday. It was the authentic last will of Richard Corwin Bradley, explicitly recognizing Linda as his daughter and bequeathing the bulk of his private fortune to her and Margaret, while establishing generous charitable foundations. Overjoyed and overwhelmed, Linda shared the discovery with Thelma Thompson. While Linda stepped into the inner room to change out of her gardening clothes, Thelma quietly picked up the telephone and alerted Arthur Matthews to the document's recovery. Within minutes, Arthur Matthews arrived at the residence alongside his security personnel. When Linda realized that Thelma had compromised her trust out of misplaced loyalty and financial promise, she attempted to protect the document. Arthur Matthews took the paper and ordered his men to quietly convey Linda away in a waiting commercial van to prevent any public declaration. Barnaby and JR, arriving at the house moments later after finding the telephone line repeatedly busy, spotted the departing vehicle. Acting quickly, they intercepted the transport down the road, safely securing Linda and recovering the document before any harm could occur. Days later, the sunlight poured through the high-arched windows of the grand Bradley estate. Linda walked through the spacious living rooms, accompanied by Barnaby, JR, and official legal representatives who were finalizing the formal probate filings. The environment was majestic, yet Linda remained humble, thoughtful, and deeply grateful for the truth that had been brought to light regarding her mother's honor and her father's true intentions. JR looked around the grand hall with a light smile, joking that the surroundings were certainly impressive. He playfully remarked to Barnaby that seeing such wealth made him wonder if he might qualify for a modest salary increase. Barnaby chuckled warmly, clapping JR on the shoulder, and noted that true value is found in integrity, justice, and good company. All of